Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. This is a beautiful day, isn't it? So I want to welcome you to attend the talk this afternoon concerning the exhibition Doing Time, a solo show by artist Deching Xie. Taipei Fine Arts Museum resides in the capital. Actually, it is the first contemporary and modern contemporary museum in Taiwan. It's an honor of us that we organize the Taiwan Pavilion exhibition for the past 22 years. So this is the 11th edition that we attend this beautiful event. For this show, Doing Time, actually, it's a marvelous making. Except that for the first time, we put together two one-year performance pieces done by Deching Xie decades ago. Besides this, there's three pieces that it's been done 1973. It's a long time ago before he jumped ship to the United States, the work done in Taiwan. So this kind of a historical route, I think it's involved a lot of interesting issues that we can talk about today. I have to remind you that the show is happened in the Palazzo Prigiani. I hope that you can have a chance to really go over there, and maybe you did go, and maybe afterwards. So today's talk, I'd like to welcome Professor Carol Baker, Professor Peggy Fallon, Professor Jen Randall, and the moderator will be the great curator, Adrian Hesfield. And also let's welcome the groundbreaking, fascinating artist, Deching Xie, first. And now I'm going to leave the time for Adrian to start the whole thing. And I hope that you will enjoy the afternoon. We wish that you will get a really new invention, new interpretation of these historical archives. So, Adrian, thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Pinglin, and welcome to you all. I'm very, very grateful to Deching for agreeing to be in this conversation. In a way, it's one of many conversations that have been taking place over the last 14 years, not just between me, but between some of our speakers and Deching. As you know, some of our speakers were in the book on Deching's work, Out of Now. So we see this session as a kind of continuation of the dialogue. The way that this session will work is that I'm going to give a few quick thoughts on the exhibition, which I'm hoping that most of you will have seen, and then ask Deching a few questions on his thoughts at this moment in time, as we, as Director Pinglin said, in a situation where we're seeing much more of Deching's work than we've ever seen before on display. And then I'm going to invite each of our fabulous guests, three of my favorite writers in the world, to give some responses and thoughts on the exhibition and Deching's oeuvre. This is very much something that we're really speaking from notes. Some things are written, some things not. We will take a break after about an hour and 10 minutes, and then we'll have tea and cake, and we'll come back in and then have a thorough conversation between us all, and a conversation that we can all join in with. You'll notice that this is a very high-tech auditorium. It seems ever since I stepped into the world of Deching Xie, everything has been being saved and recorded. But you do have some microphones beside your seat, and you can use those. It would be great if you do speak into the microphone and only into the microphone, and that's also for all of us, because there is some simultaneous translation happening for Chinese language speakers. So a few thoughts on the significance of showing and curating Doing Time. As we mentioned, really the most extensive exhibition of De Qing's work. And also, as Pinglin mentioned, the first time that works from Taiwan, from Taipei in the early 1970s have been put in relation and shown with the one-year-long performances. For me, putting all of these works in relation, certain dynamics that I think I had simply recognized previously have come into a fuller sense of living consequence. The first would be the gesture of subjection of a whole life that founds the work, making oneself in a way a servant of certain rules that strip away life's securities and cast De Qing not just into an art of existence, which is the title of this event, but really an art of subsistence. And that was really strongly felt, suddenly putting these two one-year performances together. But also I was struck again by the incredible prescience of the work that was made between 35 and 43 years ago, and the way in which it's predictive of certain conditions that have consumed life, but were, I think, only really emergent at the time that these works were being conceived and made. In particular, we know that De Qing chose not to use his labor as a time clock just for a 9 to 5, but for 24/7. And I think this work was incredibly prescient in understanding the way in which all of life would become surveyed, captured, regulated, accelerated by capitalism. And in identifying the particular technologies of capital, the relationship between this capture and the whole field of visuality, which we see in the exhibition, where it is De Qing's body that is being captured and called into attention before the image over and over and over again. So I think De Qing's work feels out the contours of that reality that we're now living in, that reality really of a kind of bio power with absolute clarity. But I was struck not just by the prescience of the work, but really the way in which all of this work seems to be propelled, sort of canonized off into a distant future. Almost as if this work was conceived for audiences now, or for audiences that were not present at the time but would be present to it in the future. And I was particularly struck by that in relationship to the outdoor piece, because it's so clear in the way in which it evokes particular conditions that are shared, conditions of life that are shared by many people on this planet at this moment in time. That is, conditions of precarity, instability, itinerant life, and a life that is led without the securities of dwelling or of home or of belonging. So it feels to me as if there are a kind of set of burning issues in this work for the human subject, that he was really able to speak about a kind of future in which life would be very unstable, very much on the move, and lived in relationship to threatening elements, a changed relationship to nature, where the human question is really the struggle to survive, the struggle to stay alive. Finally, I've been struck by this incredible dynamic when you put these two one-year performances together and you think about also the volume of 5 one-year-long performances, which is what an extraordinary, monumental work of faith this is. To persevere for these experimental life practices, for De Qing to persevere through them and to live out those concepts. What it might mean now in this post-factual condition that we are living in, to keep a promise to oneself and to others about a particular way of life, which seems so alien now in a condition in which we expect deceit, infelicity, deception, disappointment in the ordering of life, in the powers that determine life, the laws of life. So those are my sort of very brief thoughts. But I wanted to ask you, De Qing, what it feels like for you, because this is quite an unusual circumstance. You've only ever really shown singular one-year-long performances before, and suddenly they're being brought together. And we've been through this process together, of course, over a long year now of talking about the work. And what does it feel like to see these pieces together? And what, for you, are they disclosing about your work?
Okay. You said, because first I had to say the space is quite limited. I only can fit in the 2-piece one-year perform. So I choose the time clock piece and outdoor piece. That is the second piece one-year perform and third piece one-year perform. And my work you can see by the one altogether, or you can see separate. And to me, because I would say, my first piece one-year perform is all my work become a cornerstone, because it's all my idea come back from that and to make this whole become one sense. And to me, because my perform is to show different perspective of thinking of life, and this perspective is recondition. Come from same recondition, and it's life is life sentence, life is passing time, and life is a free thinking. And because my work, you can see here, you see this one, you see it? Actually, that's small. So make a, I do try to do each piece, change. But after I do sign 2000, I don't do art anymore, so life's changed. And even you can see this image, you see I lay down this way or I lay down another way. Try to make I have make my life change also in the cage inside. So, so to me, I want to say is like, my work is not about how to pass in time. It's just for passing time. So it doesn't matter, keen or the homeless, all people working hard or the do nothing, it's the same passing time. So to me, that's the way I, live into art time and to pass time and have free thinking. Okay.
So I know there's a question that lots of people always want to ask you, and I want to ask it again to you. But there are there are in these performances, particularly the 5th one-year-long performance and the 13-year plan, gestures where you negate in some way or another art, either by not having any contact with art or making art but not showing it visibly. And then in the year 2000 you said, I'm done, I'm finished with art, I'm no longer an artist, I'm not making art anymore, I'm just, in your words, doing life. My sense of it is that this declaration at the end of the work is different from declaring within an artwork that you are not doing art or not showing art visibly. It's a different kind of gesture. I wonder if you can talk about that, because lots of people, especially because of the fact that in this exhibition you helped us to recover one of your very early works. What your thinking is about that and how you conceive that statement.
Yes, since 2000, I don't do art anymore. I don't say I'm, finished art, but I just don't do it anymore. So to me, I'm just doing life, and so to me, to be artist, if you still in life, if you don't continue to do it, and then probably, you hide, it become quit. You don't do things, or another way you die, clearly to me. But because I still hanging around in the art world, and to show my work or have a make book with Adrian, so introduce people about my work, and so my position become witness. But of course, some way I feel as irony is like I become sub-artist, to stay in this position, and yeah.
Does that mean that there's no creativity in your life? There is creativity in your life. Creativity,
yes. We human, we all, have to be. We don't have to use the name of art.
Yes.
And to create. So I enjoy for do this kind of things.
Yeah. Yes.
But I still say I'm doing life. That's all. Basically, I don't try to say what things detail about life things.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you, De-Ching.
Thank you.
We're going to hear from our guests, and then obviously later we can have much more conversation with De-Ching and our guests. But I'd like to ask Carol first of all for her thoughts on the exhibition and on De-Ching's work.
So we had the wonderful experience, Peggy and I and Adrian, and working together on a beautiful book that Adrian edited. So I wrote that original essay for De-Ching. It was really like an act of love about the work. And I had certain thoughts about it, and I talked about Kafka, and I talked about the hunger artist, and I talked about what motivates people from the inside to do amazing acts, and where does that integrity come from. And so I wrote that essay. But life changes, and things have changed. And my response to the work, surprisingly for me, has changed. So let me these are thoughts. So when De-Ching says doing life, I guess my question is, will we be able to continue doing life as we've known it? And I have several thoughts about why I think that's a question. And it has everything to do with a sense of precariousness, which is a word Adrian already used, and a sense of disruption, which is a word that we're hearing a lot these days. And I have three things which worry me a lot and which have disrupted my psyche. And one of them is the fear, and I should also say I'm very much a Hannah Arendt person. So I've framed my remarks pretty much around her discourse. So Hannah Arendt says that we are a human species because we live on Earth. That were we ever to leave Earth, go to Mars, for example, which seems to appeal to some people but totally terrifies me as an idea, we would have to re-philosophize, re-theorize everything about being human, because everything we've ever known about the species is the result of living on Earth. Now, we run the risk, I have to watch time, so I'm going to put my watch right. We run the risk of losing the Earth, losing the home, the only home the species has ever known, because of climate change and because of the precarious behavior of humans. So that's one huge fear that I have about, will we be able to do life as we've ever known it? The second is one that Adrian's already referred to, and that has to do with the millions of people who are displaced, who will never, ever have a home again. It's not like they will ever, that people who have been living in refugee camps for years will return home. Some will never return home. So then the whole notion of home is transformed. What does that even mean anymore? And for a species that really believes in that one must have a home, what does it mean to think that millions and millions of people will never, ever again have a home? And the third thing, which I worry about enormously, is what is being called the fourth industrial revolution, which is to say we've been through industrialization, we've been through post-industrialization. I noticed in some of the writing for the Biennale, post-industrial culture hub, cities being referred to as post-industrial culture hubs. What does that mean? That's fascinating to me. So if we are in the fourth industrial revolution, it's defined in somewhat as post-industrial and also a point in time when we as a species are creating another species, which is robotics, and that we will be sharing work and the notion of work with what is often called labor substitutes now in the discourse of fourth revolutionary theory, and we will either be usurped in all our efforts to work by labor substitutes that we humans are creating, or we will be working side by side with labor substitutes that we are creating. But whatever happens, there will be no work for many people. And this is theorized way beyond me and by many, many others. And there's so much talk about paying people not to work. And then people say to me, well, don't you think that's great? Because then everyone will be artists. Don't even get me started on that comment. Go there. So these are the things that actually worry me. Like, what has defined the species always? Humans are homo faber. We are people who make things. We work. What if we no longer work and we no longer have a home? So now to Dershing, who I think was really, I mean, so much of what I'm thinking is really a result of looking at the work again, and to add to the discourse and to the language, I want to throw out some more Hannah Arendt ideas, which is the difference between labor and work. So for Arendt, labor is what the repetitive task, the task that Dershing is showing so clearly in the timepiece, the notion of repetition, repetition, repetition without end, the sense of laboring to consume, labor to consume, no end, manual labor, labor which has no creative element to it, but is just a route kind of repetition, versus what she calls work, which is partly what artists get to do and what thinkers get to do and what designers get to do, and people who conceptualize an idea and actualize an idea which actually has an end. So that's talked about in Arendt as work. So there's a distinction between labor and work. What's really fascinating about what Dershing, Adrian knows where I'm going. He hasn't heard this, but I can see he knows what I'm about to say, which is that he's performed the alchemy of turning an act of labor into work through the vehicle of art. So he's showing labor and the notion of labor, but he's redefined it, even though he's used all the accoutrements of labor, the outfit, the time clock, all of these things which we signify as having to do with labor, he's transformed them into work by the vehicle of art, by having a structure, a conceptual structure of art. So I'm interested in this kind of alchemy that he performs and the alchemy of what artists can perform. So the timepiece really, really captures that for me. So he turns this notion of work and labor on its head by making an artwork out of labor, basically. So in showing us how brutal, how time passes, how it wrecks the body, he makes us really think about the nature of what labor is. And in showing us that, he shows us that what art does is it can turn the ordinary into the extraordinary through a concept. And I have a quote from Rancière here that I like very much. And he says, artistic practice is not the outside of work, but its displaced form of visibility. So there's an ordinariness to art making in that it captures the ordinariness, or can capture, and does capture in Dershing's work, the ordinariness of life and the ordinariness of work, but he captures it in an extraordinary way. And one more concept that I would also want to talk about, and that I think is very prominent, and Adrian and I have both referred to it in this notion of displacement, but another Arendt term, which is worldlessness, the notion that one could choose to live in a condition of worldlessness, which is what the outdoor piece is. It would be in Hannah Arendt's sense, that to live without human community, to live without the notion of a home, but to willfully choose worldlessness makes us understand what it is to have a world, and what it is when a world is taken from you in a way that's so dramatic and explicit, and to live in the condition of worldlessness as an artist. You know, Hannah Arendt was herself a worldless person because she was displaced by the Nazis in World War II, had to flee Germany, came through Europe, eventually comes to the United States, but she was very sensitive to this notion of what constitutes a world for a human being. So it seems inconceivable to us that someone would choose a condition of worldlessness, even for one day, to live outside on the street of New York in the winter with nothing and no human community to sustain you. But to imagine a year, it's an almost inconceivable thought. And Zizek says, those who have nothing have only their discipline. And that also is so clear that in that act of creating worldlessness, there's nothing that can sustain you except this incredible discipline to have made, and Adrian alluded to that, to have made a certain commitment. And commitment and integrity, as you say now, are words which are becoming so elusive to us that we don't even know what's true or what's not. And when someone actually acts with integrity, it's almost shocking. So in doing so, and most of the people who know the show and know the history of Dershing, and certainly Adrian's written about it, in doing so, Dershing Shea put himself at enormous risk because of his undocumented status living in New York at that time on the street. The word that is being used a lot now in the United States for undocumented people is unauthorized. Unauthorized. So the notion that you could be in an unauthorized situation, but through the making of art, you could authorize yourself. You could give yourself the authority to act, and to act in a very daring way, I think also really speaks to the notion of what art can do and the authority that an artist can assume. And all of it basically has to do with structure. And once back to Rancière, he might call this the living fabric of life being made into the theatrical, which I think is so apropos. And in this process, I think Dershing, he shows us, makes us aware of life, as he says, as the passing of time, but also of art as the structuring of ideas. Me.
Thank you so much, Carol. Jane.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you so much, Adrian, and to all my Taiwanese hosts for inviting me to engage with the work. And I think you're quite right, Carol, that to come across work of such integrity at this time is really very, very moving. I wasn't part of the book, but I've read it in great detail and really, really enjoyed the essays. And I was moved to write something, possibly because I felt so moved by the writing I'd already come across. But I've actually decided I'm not going to read the piece that I've written for Tishing. Maybe I'll share it with you later. But I want to talk through some of the ideas that have come out of the writing that I've done the last day or so. I think I'm still in the process, maybe a little bit differently from Adrian and the others, in terms of, I think I'm still going into the work. I'm not coming back to it for the second time, although I'm sure I will. So I'm still really entering it and trying to understand it and moving from having understood the work through the documentation that's been available and then experiencing the installation, which I'll come to in a minute, the difference between those two for me. But I think when I started to familiarise myself with the work, given my interest in site and situation, I thought that I might want to say something around situated practice. But actually what came to my mind quite intuitively was a book by the psychoanalyst, the French psychoanalyst André Green, a book called The Work of the Negative. So my comments in a way are around the idea of doing time as a working of the negative. So for those of you who don't know Green, he's a very, I think, a very key figure in psychoanalysis. He's written a lot on space in psychoanalysis, also a lot on time, which I think is very appropriate here, and also this very important work around actually the positive force of the negative. Perhaps I'll start by saying why I think psychoanalysis is important here. It may not seem an obvious place to start with your work. But I think one of the key terms in psychoanalysis is the setting. And what's interesting about the setting and the subject of many different arguments among analysts is the relationship between the physical site, where analysis takes place, the frame, which are the conditions or arrangements, or if you like, the rules for the process, and then the process itself. So the relationship between site, frame, and process is key, and I think that has been very interesting to me to think about in relation to the one-year performances, specifically this idea of the art process in relation to rules and sites. The other thing that Green writes about, very particularly in terms of the setting, is the idea of the setting as a closed space. So it's an inner space, but he says it's not the same as the inner space of the psyche. Neither is it the same as the space of the kind of outside world. It has this typology, which is this closed space, different from inner and outer worlds. And I found this a really interesting way to think about time clock piece, for example, where home, once perhaps a closed space in terms of safety and retreat and comfort, becomes this site of regulation, more often associated with the constrictions of the outside world of work. And then in relation to outdoor piece, space that's traditionally viewed as out of doors or outside the space of the city is somehow turned inside out. I was really interested in Tishing's position behind all these doors that lead into other people's interiors and that somehow make this outside space into a kind of room, but it's a room that's more like a prison where there's no way out into these other interiors. And I think you've written really interestingly in the interview with Adrian about imposing a condition of self-exile. And so this, for me, and the outside piece is a kind of outside room which is permanently a site of exclusion. And I think really interesting things come out of that, as Carol's been talking in terms of our contemporary condition. Another thing Green writes about in terms of analysis is that it's a temporal process. And he has this very, very interesting discussion about the functioning of time in the session, which I think is appropriate to think about here. He talks about the difference between heralding anticipation, so what is going to happen, and how the analyst might be in touch with what is about to happen in the speech of the analysand, but I think we can also transpose this into the art. And how that relates to what he calls retrospective reverberation, so how we reflect on what has already happened and what we think and reflect about that. And he's not talking here about any kind of linearity. It's a back and forth movement between anticipation and reflection. And one of the things that fascinates me about the work is this anticipation of reflection. And I was particularly fascinated by that in relation to Outdoor Peace, and particularly in the specific curation of that here, where, for those of you who've maybe not seen the work, the decisions made to include some of the clothing that you were wearing on the street. And that really brings you into the experience of the kind of, you've talked about how the dirt was a kind of protection for the skin, but the presence of that clothing, and thinking then about living on the street and what that means. And yet somehow the documentation in the form of the maps is absolutely pristine and so well looked after and uncreased and not dirty on any level at all compared to, say, the sleeping bag or the jacket or the boots. And so I'm really interested in how the future was anticipated here to be reflected upon later, and perhaps something I'd really like to find out in conversation is whether this is the future that you anticipated. To move on to the work of the negative, I'm not going to go into great detail here. For those of you who know it, it's a complex book, but I think what's important about it is that Green writes about the fact that the practice, so it's not the theory here, it's the practice of analysis, is a particular kind of work which makes the negative visible. And it does this because it concerns intersubjective confrontation, not just the address of another subject, but an experience in which that other subject has to be included but not controlled. But also, very interestingly, he talks about how there's a double confrontation with the other without and the other within. And I think that this is very interesting to reflect upon in relation to the work. He talks about 4 different kinds of negative: absence, refusal, reversal or inversion, and also nothing. And I'll just say a few words about each of those different thematics that Green raises in relation to the work. So starting with absence, I think when I first came into contact with the work, especially through the forms of representation or documentation, my immediate experience was of absence, that somehow the work was absent from me, but I was also absent at the time of staging the work, despite the fact that things that have been said about that show that particularly your idea of that was that that isn't so important to have been there at the time. It's actually, and I'll come on to that in a moment. But that feeling of having been absent alerted me to the presence of other subjects in the work. And I was really interested in the wonderful Out of Time book, the letters that are written to you, and how you feature as a presence in those letters, whether you're in the park or receiving coffee, in the lecture theatre, in the gallery. And then there are also other letters that were written at the time, some in solidarity. I think one person refers to Te-Ching as a brave soul. Someone else writes a quite threatening letter, commanding you to return to Taiwan, that the work is a dishonor of some sort. But my favorite subject who appears in the work is in Te-Ching's account of Cage Piece, when an old lady comes into the studio and looks around and comes close to the cage and holds the bars of the cage and asks, "Where is the work?" And you say, "I have no response, of course." So where is the work? I'm not going to go into that in detail here amongst this company of performance practice theorists, but one could certainly say that the performances themselves perhaps are absent, the documentation is present. Well, this has been debated massively in performance practice, and it's not my discipline, so I hesitate to go there. But I think what is interesting in relation perhaps to these comments about anticipation and reflection is that when I first came across the work, I was surprised that there was any need for documentation at all. In fact, in order to keep the absence of presence in the work alive, would it simply have been sufficient to have heralded anticipation? But I think what I've found really interesting over the last few days thinking about the work is that it's precisely the shifting and changing of absence and presence in the work as one experiences it. It'd be interesting to hear what others think about this. That is a very integral part to the work. There are obviously these documents that are present, the photographic traces, we can read time passing in the growth of Tiqing's hair, which is remarkably fast, actually. I was wondering if my hair would have grown quite that fast over a year. And then countering the figurative representations, there are these more abstract representations, space-time coordinates, the clocking in cards, and in other works not shown here, the tapes and so forth. And then there's this extraordinary film in time clock piece, which reminded me a bit of Walter Benjamin's Angel of History. So this is an angel, this is Benjamin writing about Paul Clay's drawing of the Angel of History, whose wings are blown into the future, to which his back is turned, and this angel is then reflecting on the debris of history building up in front of him. So in the gallery, as Tiqing's kind of stammering face seems to be falling towards us, his own eyes are on this kind of rotting debris of the performances that are there materially decaying in the gallery now. I'm also interested in the statements of the witnesses, which affirm the presence of Tiqing through his actions. They say what it is that he's done, and almost like the letters and pretty much all the criticism of the work, they are affirmations of presence. And somehow I wonder whether this is because they're anticipating his future absence from the work itself. The negatives also at play in these moments of failure, the moments where Tiqing fails to clock on, which are very, very carefully accounted for. I'm sure some of you will have read the reasons, that sleeping and so forth. And I think what's very beautiful in the way that the work's been curated in Venice is these absences, whether they are indeed negatives, produce an undulating fringe around the lower edge of the images. And this holds the work back from a pure machinic precision, so that the body in its unpredictable limits make itself felt within the curation itself. I was also struck by another kind of negative, the moment in Outdoor Peace when the police tried to force Tiqing inside, and in the film made by a friend who was passing, he's really distressed, and shouts and tries to refuse arrest. And the police seem to think he wants to avoid punishment for breaking their law, but I found it really interesting that the distress is because he doesn't want to break his own law. I think this was, for me, very, very, very striking in the work. And then just to move to the final two registers of the negative more briefly, the refusal in the work. I think it's fascinating to read the anticipatory statements in the negative, to read them for what he says he will do, but also for what he says he will not do. So for Cage Piece, I shall not converse, read, write, listen to the radio, watch television until I unseal myself on September 29th, 1979. For Outdoor Peace, I shall not go into a building, subway, train, car, airplane, ship, cave, tent. And then further on for 1 year piece for 1985 to 86. I not do art, not talk art, not see art, not read art, not go to the gallery and art museum for 1 year. And 13-year plan. I will make art during this time. I will not show it publicly. So I'm really interested in the expression of will in this way. The expression of will in terms of what people, or in this case, what Tiqing says he will do, and he says elsewhere that will is the most important part of the execution of the work, more important than the body, which although kind of highly trained through the military and heavy construction work seems to be expected to somehow just follow along. But there's also what will not be done. And I wonder which is the stronger, the will or the will not. And it seems that the will not sets itself against something. It takes back control through refusal. And you say, as an illegal immigrant, it was natural for me to be concerned with the law, but I was the one who built rules, executed them, and broke them as well. And there's also this sense of refusal in the breaking of social rules or codes. Audiences are invited, for example, into cage piece, but Tei-Ching refuses to make eye contact. Eye contact was to be avoided. That's a very important refusal, I think. And also very, very striking in outdoor piece, the street, the most social of places, but the Tei-Ching is not hanging out. He's in retreat, isolation, refusing in the main, although we see the notes of various people that were met for lunch, and some I know are here today, but any interaction with the public. So these are refusals that attempt to cut off by disappearing somewhere else, including inside himself. But somehow, I think, in terms of one of Green's other negatives, which is the inversion, I think there's also an inversion of the positive that occurs in response somehow to the refusal. So by refusing, by holding things back, Tei-Ching invites the viewer to positively imagine and to fill the absence of his refusal. He says of rope piece, by holding back the tapes, they make a question, they give you imagination. And then what I was really struck with, because of my interest in space, was this very, very interesting inversion between cage piece and outdoor piece, where Tei-Ching uses his imagination in cage piece to imagine, enlarge the narrow confined space of the cage. He says, in order to make the space inside the cage bigger, I treated the corner with my bed as home, and the 3 other corners were outside. I would take a walk outside and then come home. I thought that was really striking. And in outdoor piece, somehow the reverse of that. He had the run of the city, but no place of security and comfort, and says, I expanded my activity to treat the whole city as my home. For instance, Chinatown was my kitchen, the Hudson River was my bathroom, those parking lots, empty swimming pools, small parks were my bedroom. In winter, the meat market district of 14th Street was my fireplace. I built a fire there to keep myself warm. I was very close to this city, but at the same time very alienated from society. So in these kind of inversions, the imagination is what allows presence and absence to exist at the same time. The open city can be imagined as the home denied, the prison cell imagined as the outside that he's keeping himself from for a year. And in the end, confinement is also possible to turn into freedom through the imagination as well. I think Tei-Ching at some point says, I am as free in the cage as outside. And then just very finally to end on the nothing, which is Green's fourth understanding of the work of the negative. He puts it quite strangely with his definition of the nothing. It's having been so and being so no longer. This is where the negative in psychoanalysis is concerned with the unconscious, so the negative of the conscious, the not conscious, material that's repressed and is, in many cases, particularly through trauma, really not accessible. But some of this material can and does surface, like memories. And Tei-Ching says to Adrian in their interview in Out of Now, it's about how to manage and rearrange these fragments of memories, transfer them into language and a process of discourse. This is what we are doing right now. So do the memories of Tei-Ching and others who have known the man, the artist, his work, counteract the work of the negative by bringing the absent past into present time, revisiting sites, remaking a previous work, looking for those traces the city holds of what has been. What do these actions do to the work of the negative? So.
Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you so much. I'm sure you're getting fatigued, so let me be brief. I can't begin, though, without saying how incredibly honored I am to see this work. And also, I feel that I am here in the echo, the haunting echo, of many memories, one of which I'll talk about in the body of the talk. Thank you for inviting me. And I come from Palo Alto, California, to Venice, Italy, to talk about an artist whose work I encountered in New York, where he had come from Taiwan. Location, Teixing teaches us, is about much more than the physical or even the metaphysical space one is in. Location always includes the history of dislocations that have brought us to this arrival here in Venice, here now, as we celebrate and acknowledge this rare and radical and still misunderstood, misseen artist. Teixing She's performance work, perhaps especially the year-long performance that has come to be known incorrectly as Outside, exposes the rawness of our fundamental homelessness. By making a contract to remain uncovered, naked, exposed, uncovered by a roof, a tent, a subway, a taxi, and so on, although I always smile because he does allow his head to be covered by a hat. And I noticed in the curation, many of the photos have him in a hat, which I think is very interesting, in part because of the hair from the other piece as well. So what is it that, what do we cover this part of our bodies with? In this piece, Teixing dramatized the exile that is fundamental to the human condition. If this work from 1981, 1982, seems only to gain in force and clarity each day as we leave it behind, it may well be because the scope of things like, and here I have to pause and say, I'm all too aware of being from the United States and speaking in Europe. So I know what I'm about to say might strike some people as, I wish I were not in the location that I am in when I say this sentence. Because the scope of the current refugee crisis suggests that the continual production and reproduction of war, conflict, and economic brutality shows no signs of ending. Doing time, indeed. The best we seem to be able to do is change the location of war rather than budge the fact of war. Part 2. By choosing the contract as his primary mode of performance, Teixing She also explores the complex relationship between loyalty and betrayal, both unavoidable aspirations and achievements. The aspiration or betrayal is still unthought. Whether Teixing's contract is with a machine, or with Linda Montano, or with himself, the audacity of his performance's long durations move them outside the framework of the strictly aesthetic. To spend 13 years working on a piece whose summarizing line is, quote, "I survived," is to suggest that the border between life and art has been eroded. To perform is to live, and to live is to perform. So here's the echo of one memory. Adrian and I went to the end of that performance, which was curated by Martha Wilson, who is here, and it was held at the Judson Church in Greenwich Village, New York. And Teixing came out. And I always have this memory that your mother was there, but it might be a completely false memory. And I even put in print, I think his mother was there. I don't actually want to know if your mother was there. I just have a memory that his mother was there. A ghost mother, maybe. And when Teixing announced to this crowd that he had survived, a white gentleman in his 50s or so yelled out, "Well, I've survived too, and it's not art." And we all laughed. And then a woman, a white woman, tried to save the awkwardness by suggesting we sing Happy Birthday, because it was his birthday. And Teixing, and I believe his mother, declined to have Happy Birthday sung. But nonetheless, this woman insisted on singing Happy Birthday. So it was this celebration of a temporal anniversary that the recipient declined, but the woman insisted on doing. So that ending was one of the strangest kind of celebrations, and both an acceptance of the piece and a rejection of the piece in the moment of its ending, which was extremely rich. Okay, so when Teixing says that he used to spend his life doing art, and now he spends his life doing life, the doing is what is important. The doing is the consciousness that he brings to the activity of life. And as with most philosophical propositions of this sort, there are advantages and disadvantages to what he is suggesting. He is suggesting that the erosion between life and art has been completed, that there is no distinction between art and life. And it's more a matter of what he calls bringing his art energy or his life energy to bear on everyday life. And his notion of art energy, I would like to suggest here, again with some trepidation, because I know this audience, does for me have a lot of resonance with the Eastern concept of breath. And maybe in the Q&A we can come back to that. A kind of doing breath as a way to frame what it is to do life. But this erosion of the line between art and life can also obscure the difference between truth and illusion. In the age of the Trump administration's alternative facts, Teixing's integrity shines like a beacon. His sense of purpose beckons us back to the first border, the first violence, the first cell. Part 3. The show, Doing Time, takes place in a former prison, which I think is so brilliant. And this location, again, the location, calls attention to Teixing's performance that Jane just talked about so well, of the cage. And the cage, I want to suggest, is here in the architecture and in the ghosting frame, the reverberation of a memory rather than an embodiment. So as you go up the stairs, and you have to pay attention or you might miss it, as I did, you will see prison bars. And in the prison bar, in the cell, are the marks, the counting from the cage. And that marking, that almost a hieroglyph, it's a cell and it's a cave, it feels like to me. The counting behind the bars is the mark of time and duration. And counting becomes both an action of measurement and, importantly, a meditation on value. What does it mean to count socially? What does it mean to count politically? Who gets to count? Who gets to mark a prison wall? The double frame of counting underlines the gap between the intention to perform, the contract to perform, the aspiration to be faithful, and the force, the brutal force of the live. The mistake of the clock mismatch is very important in clock piece. He is either too early or too late 134 times. That is to say that even within that piece, the fact of life, the fact of the mistake, continues to reverberate. And this, I will say, I wrote about it in Out of Time, but when I encountered Taixing in outdoor, in Untitled 1981-82, I thought he was a homeless person. So it's a misrecognition of category, and it's a misrecognition that is central to what it is to perform. Part 4. This show is the documentation of the documentation of performance. The show, Doing Time, documents Taixing's documentation of his performance. From the location of the undocumented, Taixing overturns what it means to count enough, long enough, vividly enough, to enshrine, to frame one's life. Some of us in this room will say to frame it as art, but let's not. Let's frame it as life. Thank you.
So the second part of this session is really run as a conversation. And I wanted just perhaps to start some conversation by asking Decheng a question, and it comes as a little bit of a reflection on some of the things that have been said. Decheng had this amazing phrase when he said, I'm just doing time. It doesn't matter if I'm a king or a homeless person, I'm just doing time. And I was thinking about that erasure of the difference of status in Decheng's work, and hearing in all of the different talks a certain kind of status that came up time and again, which was the human status, the human condition. And I noticed that Decheng, your pictorial invocation of the changes in your work was Snoopy, Snoopy the dog. And I was thinking about Snoopy quite a lot in terms of the human condition. And I was thinking that there is a kind of recognition in Decheng's work of the animal and of the human animal that we are. And that might be one of the status differences that is being collapsed in this work. But I guess I was also thinking that the two different sides of animalization get shown in your work, becoming animal. I'm thinking in the time clock piece of this this moment towards the end of the film when we see this kind of ragged creature with his hair flailing across his face. So for me, a kind of something there of a kind of liberatory animalization. And then I'm also thinking of this moment in the outdoor piece, which in some senses we could see as a long trajectory of becoming animal. When the guy, the building owner, is repulsed by Deching's presence next to his building and tries to remove him, and his means of removing him is to beat him with a crowbar, so beating him like a dog. And Deching, in some of our conversations, you referred to yourself as a street dog. You become a street dog. I wanted, so that kind of animalization is of course the animalization that comes with racism, which we know so well, the beating animalization. But I wonder if you could talk about what it means to you, this being an animal, and how you understand how that sort of played into your work in any way. Were you recognizing that as a quality of human life?
I'm not trying to say, it's put down me in street dog. It's just I try to find one word is right, or what kind of animal, I am if I live in the street,
Yeah.
So, but to me, I come in this country, I come to America, right, illegally. So to me, in that time, first year, I feel I more like to go to tree or something, because I know, because the reason I come to America, I cannot use paper. Yeah. So to me, the direction to go, straight line is just illegal, no paper. And so to me, that I try to come back my originalism. Me, I like primitive. That's kind of thing I like. 主观翻译一下，等一下。Instinct. I like that kind. But you see my work, you don't see. Look like I do more. I have prepared all of that. But you see, I like civilization very much. Like say my work, I don't do in a mountain, but I like to do in cities. So to me, it's a company. I like keep animal or the primitive. You see, my English 42 years. My English proved this way. It's the same. It's such. And then I can tell you one truth until not today.
Yeah.
I just say to people, I pretend I don't fall asleep. I look at listen what you're talking, but actually I told you my English I don't get it much. I'm sorry for that. Because I only know I don't want my eyes fall asleep. That's important. Yeah. I only keep that. But you once say I already know, then I'd ask a translator. Later, give me the paper.
Yes.
So that's my speed is different.
Yeah.
But I like to in the city, kind civilization because I can do, like I said, Adrian, I can do construction and I know the technique. I can build several ways to learn things. But I learn it's something from primitive way. I don't learn from civilization way. Like I said, if one machine, I can be damaged, but at least that's my car or that's my machine. So nobody will say, you don't do that way, you do that way, you will damage that. Yeah. So I do think, well, like I said, anymore, this word is not bad words for me. It's just I like to live in civilization, but another way I don't want to be to civil, the rule. Like I say, you see my work, now you see control something, but in my underground, because my work is my character, so I really fit in my character to make it. So I have underground, I have a lot of freedom. Of course, I know I build a law, I understand human build a law, but also I understand history. Even the Italian, Rome, Pope, he said God something, but actually it's himself do it, right? He breaking the law for many times, so I understand. I build a law and I breaking the law.
Yeah.
So you see in the case outdoor piece, I changed my name, right? Back to that. Suppose in the law you really mistake something or you do something, you don't you finish piece, then you change. You don't do changing halfway. So people can find some evidence. Means that you want to answer me, oh, my backpack, the name with my statement, why different?
Yes.
I answer you because I make law and I break the law.
Yeah.
So I already say more about animal side. Enough for
Yes, yeah. But it's great that you talk about the law in this context because, of course, it came up in all of the talks in a particular way because the outdoor piece is in a way the place where you encounter the law in all of its violence the most. And these red stamps where you change your name back from Samshe, which is in a way, a kind of hiding as an undocumented person. This is a common Taiwanese and Chinese way of making an official stamp, right? The red stamp. But the law really bites you, back in this piece in a particular way.
The reason why I'm in the art world, my work to communicate, I do by my way because I like, it's like I make my own system and I try to understand the art world system, but I understand it's a very slow, not much. I have to really experience, then I know. So to me, you see, I don't get a grant, I don't do that kind of thing. My family become my grant. Of course, I want to ask the money. $1 American is $40, Taiwan's money. So it's you cannot give much. Yeah. But of course, that's helped me to less suffer.
Yes.
And of course, the work I do, it's more like means. You see, for example, like I say, I do. Let me show one. You see, this image is Kang Edison. Edison in 1920. Of course, he don't invent this time clock, but you see, he punched time clock in 1920. That's his photo. So to me, I do the work. I do a rehearsal 1 week or test to see I can really do the piece. So it's more like science way to. I like to see test if I can really, continue for a year. I must be tested a week and make the scenes I don't miss or if I cannot really continue for 7 days, then even have clear idea. I don't want it. I cannot do it. I don't want to be just sure, I can do it and then cannot do it. So to me, in some part, I like science. Even I say I like primitive, but I like science. But of course, my science is follow my intuition, But also I know, well, means my brain is thinking, many ways. Thinking because I'm free thinking, in many ways. But of course, the kind of some part, like I say, my computer, this since I'm become very bad. Like I don't write my email. If nobody have, I only say hello, hi, how are you? That's kind of only that. So I have a simple way I cannot operation.
Yeah.
That's why slowly me down. But I'm lucky I have Adrian and all this nice support and Taipei. So but it had to be long term. But I don't mind, if my work nobody respond, at least I feel to create art, then it's already benefit. But of course I'm lucky, about people respond, and then I become up to date. Yeah. So, and if my work without document, then nothing happen. I will just stay my life. So I know how to make secondary art, document secondary art. And I know art was interesting about secondary art. But to me, I have another better art, but that time passed. So that's part. It's become maybe we can human communication to talk about art. What part is best quality of art, right? It's come to see the show, or it's after see the show, and then we discuss something. So we are good. We are good in spot. to talk about. But talk about still not enough because it has to be by your own experience, life experience. Because you cannot get answer by artist self. You have to by your own experience, like imagine and thinking. Yeah. So.
Jane asked you actually in her talk a really great question, which I think we should put to you directly, which is, was this the future that you imagined for the work? We talked earlier on about the idea of the work being really directed towards a future in which it would be understood, because you were so rigorous about the documentation, so strict about the documentation, it's so elaborate, so meticulous. So there is an incredible drive to document at the same time as...
You see, to see my angle, I'm sure Carol will say, I don't know, I remember one time I talked in Colombia. She said, I don't quite, he asked me, that kind of work, did I feel pain or I say, I don't, well, I don't exactly remember, but it means I don't feel that way. So means you say I do straight for my document, but to me, I totally no straight.
Not strict.
I don't use
strict.
discipline.
Yeah.
I don't use discipline. I don't need a discipline because already this by nature I can make a lot.
Yeah.
So to me, I feel because I make my own law.
Yeah.
So I can break in like maybe few %. And I already, like I say, I must be punch down, and then I broken rule, right? Yeah. I miss punch, but at least you can see the installation. You will see I have 3 hours continue, so that's already give me recharge me for go next time. Look like a race car. If you car the tires broke,
yeah.
Then you can repair and then go. So I have a few hours. Then that's already recharge me for can be few months or half year, So to me, I still have a lot, because the work design is by my character. That's why I feel I don't need to give, like I say, as your point of view, all the outside people can see I live in street very cold, right? Yeah. But actually, if this is animal, you will know why animal, they can stay outside, the horse, they can stay, or Alaska, something. Because you see, your skin, if you have one cold leg, many cold, you don't wash it, and dirty. So, and then make believe you are the wolf, or you are the, coyote, right? Yeah. And make it use survival is better in outside. Yeah. So that kind of technique is, to me, just do it. Don't go inside, don't do that. Yeah. After that, I become so freedom, why, that way. Even I cannot touch people, but I don't do that. I forgot I'm doing peace. So I touch the owner. Because I know if I want to do the piece, I already know psychological. I don't afraid. Because that piece compared different, the case piece or outdoor piece, that's much healthier. Because nature, But in another way, that piece dangerous because violence. I can be sleep there already got killed or got hurt. Yeah. Only that kind or dirty, I don't wash that kind. Of course, I like to clean the person. So first, this piece idea is to me give me difficulty. How I cannot clean. How I can do this kind of piece. Yeah. But of course, the thing it works strong. Then I can, one idea on it. Yeah.
I don't know if any of our panelists have questions for De Ching or thoughts on each other's presentations. I think this question of the law and your investment in the law, in making your own laws, and the way that the real law interacts with you in this piece is very profound. And it's of course, the question for me is really about in this moment when the social law, the real law, the system of judgment recognizes the integrity of De Ching's performance. whether in that moment of recognition we can say there is another kind of radical potential being enacted by the work. I know you often say your work is not political, but it seems to me that you've put yourself in a situation where power is performed and shows itself, shows its operations.
I'm sorry, I just want to add, about political. I think, to me, because language, to me, I have limited. But I say something not about that, and then you can see something. I say my work is not about autobiography, and then you will see
some autobiography.
So to me, that's the way I explain myself. If my work is not political, then you see this kind of work, a lot of political.
Yeah.
So my political is underground political. My autobiography, underground autobiography. So it's a technique I have to use that way to give. I'm not saying 100% I'm not autobiography, but I don't want to, because this work I use by myself to do it, so too much like an ego. Yeah. But if my work concept is talk about universal. And my work is not about Superman, but the technique use a lot of Superman. But you see, so how I can balance this, that. So I cannot say one thing and then I miss something. So I try to give people, if you understand what I'm saying, then I always say that, and then if I say no, then me inside have a lot of yes. So I say, also, Peggy, I want to, I don't say I steal your idea, but I want to say, somebody asked me one question. I said, how you passing today? Yesterday? Then I become thinking about your writing. I say, I don't feel my words. I ask myself about how to passing time, but it's just passing time. So I know I did pass yesterday, and I have confidence to pass today, and I hope I can pass tomorrow. Did Peggy, that's your style?
Yes.
Yeah.
And if we could go back to the Snoopy for just 1 minute.
Oh, you want to go to Snoopy?
Snoopy,
Okay.
just for 1 second. Because the expectation of that at the verbal level is life is change. But it's not. It's life is changed.
Well,
So the is the present tense, and the changed is the past. And it's the fusion of those two that is the force of this phrase, doing time. And I think it's very important, at least in the US context, that phrase doing time is also the phrase of the law for criminals.
Yeah.
So the reason I was saying at the end of my talk about let's not call it, this is the validation of life as art, but this is the validation of life as life. And the radical gesture that I still find so compelling in the work, even though I think we haven't fully taken it up in terms of its theoretical force, is this idea that the lived life counts, period. And it seems so simple, but it's actually not the way we live. And I think this is, for me, the most important part of the work as a whole. But in my opinion, I know I'm not the chair, I just think we should open it because we don't have that much time.
So we have microphones by your seats, and I think if you pull them out, they work instantly, magically. We've had all of this magical technology for the last few weeks. But Marina, would you like to say a few words? There you go.
Oh, you know.
You've lit up.
You know, he's my hero, period. They changed for a long, long time. And which is so interesting what Peggy Fallon said recently, I started thinking about that. You know, so many artists make the work and then they could not say everything in the one work. You know, they realize and then they make next one and so on. And to me, which is incredibly remarkable about Te Ching, he made these 5 sublime works, but each work was 1 year, which is like, it's like a supernatural, basically. When he say, You know, I'm doing something like what you say, Superman. No, it's like Superman, but is Superman. Because I know what means 1 year is duration of work. And he really, the work is what's changing, not the life. And then the consciousness that he got from the work, he bring into the life. And just that this decision for him is as a complete proof of this transformation. When I asked him, that time, what you're doing now, and he said, I am doing life. This was for me, this is the absolute, the top. There's nothing more you can say, because the transformation took place. This is why the Snoopy works so well. Yes, life is changed. But, you have to invest every single atom of your energy, every it's not way out, you have to do things, you have to go through the total experience, and only that kind of total experience can actually bring you to that kind of change. And he's living proof, there's nobody there. And we are here in Venice, in the 21st century, in the same time the teaching is showing his work, and on the other side we have Damien Hirst. It's unbelievable, two completely opposites of complete immateriality and incredible transcendence, and I have no comment to that one.
Yeah, there's another question there, Nick.
Hi, thanks everyone. I was really struck by this story about after the 13-year plan and the people's kind of absurd responses, which actually to me is maybe not so surprising, because the work is so big and so beautiful that it's hard to know how to act in response to it in a way, because the performances are so long that it's more than Superman, because it's also like a planet. It's what a planet does. And so it becomes elemental in a way, or maybe for me, in response to the life is a life sentence, life is passing time, life is free thinking, to view your work continuously for years, to me it's total confusion is honor. That's all I can do in response, is to be witness to it and to continue along behind it, to follow it, as I am along this planet riding around with things that are so much bigger, because so much of life is not human. So maybe the question is how does the future look? Which future is it? Is it the future of you, or the planet, or the animal, or it's? I'm sorry. It's like, where do you live? How big is time? I guess.
Well, in airplane I just buy. Because I'm not good to read English. I just buy a book in Taiwan last month, and then it's about the North Pole. Already 2050 will be, all, it just become water. So of course, that just give me some education about, means maybe when it's already water will be higher, and then this city want to build again to move each piece stone to go, and it's cost quite a lot of money. So I'm saying this, look like we have a hope, but actually the human, like say North Pole, if you are one of me, in political means Russia, American, or some other country, if they try to get some benefit, only humans do is in a short time plan. You know what I mean? So, of course, we all is limited. Human talking about time is a line, right? It's line. Like yesterday cannot be tomorrow. That's kind of we are talking in another way. But of course, if one day we want to escape our plan to go to that, then we cannot just say time is one line. Another way, you cannot reach this area to go another far. It can be, 1,000 years, or another way you can go on another plane or something like that. So to me, of course, art is a human, like say, when I drive a car to go to Grand Canyon, then I know that kind of monumental, it's like one painter will paint that. Let's get, all art can do something to make a monument. But you cannot do that because I make joke. Like a God, if you use Christian, say God, the Son, right? Pray in like a kid, pray and then one ball, right? And then kick and then broke and then bring to go to see his father. Say, my ball, is cracked, right? Like a Grand Canyon. Then God say, get rid of that. I give another new ball for you. So that's the human, we are under, we are not like a monumental. Even art say monumental. But this kind of monumental is still in a small scale we're talking about. But of course art is from 渺小水可以翻译
There's
very small.
very small.
Yeah, very small. But art is more from, even 1 year is, the Nick you say is the monumental. But actually, to me, you want to connection with the universe, then that's small. But of course, to be human to, perform, oh, that's big. So I can love myself. It's depends how your human body you can handle. So to me, it's small, it's big. But another way, I already in my philosophy to understanding what human does. Of course, art is a deal with human. The way express, and it's small to do this way. And of course, I follow that. But how big is it? I'm not just trying to say, oh, because I come to Venice, so I can get a big for reality. I mean, because another way, all in here, we are all talking about 本质怎么讲？本质，啊
elemental.
Yeah. So we all this issue and talking about what human do things. Yeah. Well, I stop here. Yeah. Wait.
There's another question towards the back here. Yeah.
Hello, hi. My name is Juliet Darling. Do you think that you're doing time, but also do you think that time is doing some of the work for you?
English problem. I'm sorry.
Is time doing some of the work for you? Is time doing the work for you? You are doing time, but is time doing the work for you?
So.
I told you, I don't good thinking, by this kind of question, I can quickly answer. It's like, must be both way. Yeah. If somebody say something, you already finished, you already done what you already understand, but never. You always say, I never finish. In that way, stay, you understand human what's in. Like time, did I catch time? I just say, I cross. Because time, we understand is every day, every second is moving. So people come in, we're supposed to be 100 something, but then we know they don't come in. So every schedule is moving so fast. And so to me, I already know, answer something, if you don't use your brain, you just say opposite, and then again, then it will be okay. Yeah.
Yeah, a couple of questions here.
I always wanted, I was always blown away by just how epic each project was individually. But I always wanted the fact that you did them in such a short time span. You jumped from one project directly almost into the next project, and then almost again into the next project. So it's almost like 6-year of just your life, just doing these projects over and over. And I wanted to know, like, the transition between these projects, if it was hard for you to just get into a different headspace from leaving like the Cage project into the next project, or how each project maybe prepared you for the next project. If you accumulated some kind of...
I told you, because people experience that fear. You see, because I do first 3 pieces in 4 years. And art time, and then gap is lifetime, and then art time. So to me, you see, this kind, how to do that, of course, I have to be, even I don't have many pieces, but to me, I would say this kind, I don't want to say it's just technique, this word. It means I have to be use my whole, first piece, I'm 28 years old to do that. So I have to use my past experience, already practice in, the way I build it, and what kind of technique I can use, that's all. It's not like I say, I develop it just only, just like say, prepare only limited kind of thing. Like say, if I want to live in the outdoor, what kind of, more just like that. But of course, the mind, you have to be ready. You can get it into. I don't want to be a winter time to get into. Because but I don't follow our schedule, January 1st day. If I do that, then I finish. Then I have to wait for a lifetime, become 1 year. Then another impossible to do, next day become, So to me, this kind of, like one artist, or the way I understand it, artist, or you create, you have to spend whole your life, and then just in a very short time you do good. After you go down, I drop down. So that's why I don't continue to do it. I understand that. So, and also I show to people, say, my study, show how I am not creative person, but it is still in the public. Means I just wasting time, and pass it. Because that's part of my understanding here. So I don't mind, like Peggy said, it's about life and life. What do you say? Life to life. The last thing.
I was saying that, within the context, the location of the Venice Biennale, the temptation would be to say the documentation and the show itself, Doing Time, is about the reclamation of life as art. And I'm trying to say, let's say life as life instead of life as art, because I think the life as art continues to frame it, put it in a cell in that way, rather than let its radical everydayness and every personness be apparent. That's what I think. And I think, that art has a wonderful discursive opening up, a kind of liberation, a kind of way of, I think somebody told me, the enactment of philosophy as a verb. I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. But it is also, Damien Hirst being a good example, it's also high capitalism, and it's full of all those politics as well. And we have to be careful with this idea that art is going to, save us all. I mean, art is a practice with a lot of problems as well. So that's all I'm trying to say. And also, wouldn't it be nice for us to think about life, not art, in this way? Or life and art, maybe. But that was the gesture at the end of the talk.
My question is actually really related to what you have said, and not just directed to Taechim, but everyone, the panelists and everyone here, because I find it really fascinating that we're talking about this in this framework of Venice Biennale, this art world thing, and so if we, we kind of mutually agree that let's not call it art, but let's call it life, or, life for sake of life kind of thing. So what is this framework that we're using to talk about this? doing it, or like, what is our relationship to it? And then that's something that we've been really most interested in. Like, if we need it, there would be Life Biennale, like in 10 years, not Art Biennales, because it's been so co-opted that as if like it's so important to be in that art world. And then like, in reality, there are so many artists, in quote, who like to belong, but who can't belong, who has to be on hiatus, not as a choice, but, as a reality. So I don't know if I'm framing this as a question, but I'm interested in what everyone thinks about this, talking about this in this frame of art, the art world.
I like to answer this. Can I answer this? I'm really impulsive. Doesn't matter how we can call this art, not art, or life, who cares? Which is important that really great ideas have many lives, and they're coming back to us. And it's very interesting, the example of Taching, because he was doing things. He just went into complete shadow. Nobody would know who he was or what he was doing, and took all these years and years to go. And we all part of this. And it's going to be again the part that he will become relevant. And he's a relevant artist. And how we call things, it doesn't matter really. It's something. The art is something to touch your soul, and the art is oxygen of society. And if it does this, then you can call whatever you want, but it's changed you.
And I just would say, just to clarify my earlier remark, maybe, that I did not mean to say that the discourse of art is useless and we should get rid of it, and therefore just have. Although I do really like the idea of a biennale life biennale, I do think that a certain kind of performance practice opens up a different way of thinking about the category life. And this, to me, is very valuable. So I wasn't trying to say, forget art, but I was trying to say, let's be careful about the reification of art absent attention to life. And just to the gentleman in the back, you with the white shirt, I don't know your name, but the one who was, could you just wave your hand so everybody knows? So when you were saying about you came to the piece and you didn't know how to think about it, I do think it is important to do the labor of figuring out how to think about it. And I am on that side. I'm on the side of putting words to these things, but you could put photographs to it. It doesn't matter what your medium is. But I do think that the effort to understand the work or to receive it is not just like a kind of passive witnessing, but rather the work demands the effort to tell yourself a story about it in whatever medium you prefer or whatever. And I think that is where the framework of art can potentially move into something else. So, but I've been talking a lot, so I'll stop.
Well, I think several things. One is that we should never forget that at the core of art, whether artists are imagining it as they're making something, but art is rich with ideas. And that's, to Peggy's point of frame, we need those ideas. And art is subversive because it's fearless. And you have some of the most fearless people here. You have artists who are fearless in putting out really radical ideas, using their bodies to do it, using endurance to do it. So there's a philosophical, a fundamental understanding among artists, whether they articulate it or not, that they're trying to communicate something. And it is, and this is to Peggy's point as well, behooves us to, if we're going to be the audience for the work, or produce our own kind of work, to understand what that communication is about, so to take the time. But I'm totally for art as a practice without categorizing what that practice should be. But I want to say something just very quickly about the biennales, because, it's so easy to trash the art world. It's like the easiest thing in the world to do. But if you really look at the history of the Biennale, the reinvention of Venice when there was no longer shipbuilding to become an art capital, how many countries are here trying to say, look at us, we have ideas too, we have thought too, and creating pavilions all over the city to manifest their importance in the discussion of the 21st century. That is really also what's very important about the Biennale. And that we come together like this is what's important about the Biennale. So instead of just saying it's either this or it's that, it's all these things. And holding all those things in your mind, at any of us, is a very difficult thing to do, and yet it is the world we're living in. And add to that rapidification of the 21st century. So not only are we trying to hold all these ideas in our mind, but they're coming at us so fast. But I think we're all in that human soup together. So I just wanted to say, let's not flatten it or categorize it or break it up. Let's just say that whole big thing is what art's about, the whole thing.
The question in the middle there, yeah.
Sorry. I have a question. Isn't that, like, the whole art world completely irrelevant in terms of this experience, and it's much more the experience of the individual challenging to deal with what we consider life is. Like, it's almost the opposite. Like, you try to counter this. I mean, the natural thing would be like you feel pain, you're tired, like you. So to continue something for a year is against life. It's kind of like almost setting something against it in order to understand it, and that's to me what makes it outstanding. You know, like this experience that you have as an artist, like dealing with what we consider, what we think is life, in order to experience it, countering it. And I would be very curious, like, how did you continue after, like, you stopped working in this way? Like, you know, like, what was the process of transformation and engaging with this? And I think, like, in that respect, and also coming back what Marina said, I think an artist is no different than somebody who goes for years into retreat, or like somebody who has to survive extreme torture, or so. Like, it's this sustaining and kind of like almost like transgressing like what we consider is life into a very different kind of experience, which makes us maybe different to animals, because you mentioned before this becoming animal. I mean, an animal might not necessarily do that. They would follow much more their instincts. You almost countered your instincts.
Could I know there is a question there for De Ching, but could I also comment that because the word life is being spoken so much, and it seems to me that we really don't know what that is, and that there seems also to be this something that I find is very beautifully evoked in De Ching's work, which is that whenever we try to define what it is, we get stuck in a particular kind of bind, because we look for general conditions that would determine or define life. And we can only, it seems, I think, define life by what it's not. And then at the same time, we have this situation in which every singular life seems not to conform to any general idea of life that we have. And so I think for me, the question of what life is, life itself or a singular life, I wouldn't use the word individual, because in this work it seems to me that there is a kind of giving over of oneself, disinvestment in oneself that is so profound that the word individual doesn't really come to speak to it anymore. But I don't know, De Ching, you should perhaps respond, because the question...
I cannot get it. I hear anymore. Some other I don't know about.
Well, there were two things in the question. One was really about when you stop making art, is there still transformation, I think, and then also a question a little of, is there not really inherent to this work a transgression of what life is? a transgression of what life is are hard. Yeah. But perhaps you'd like to rephrase it.
No, not transgression what life is, not like, I don't think he stopped doing art, because the moment we still read about it and like we discuss it, it's still processed in the art world. This is why I said, like, I would not even maybe call it, do we need to call it art? In that respect, I follow Marina. I mean,
yeah.
And I still would insist it's an individual's experience, because like, it's really, at the end of the day, it comes down to what he does and not what we perceive, etc. It's the experience he made in doing this. This is, at the end of the day, what counts, and we can't know that. You know, like, so it's much more, does it stimulate us to go for such an experience ourselves? Can we think that we can go beyond something? You know, like, these limits that we constantly accept, although we don't need to. And I think that's, to me, the inspiration. Just, I hope I clarified a little bit, and I'm curious, like, what are the challenges you see today for yourself? Or like, you know, I'm sure you still do stuff, I'm pretty sure.
I think if I may, Taixing, earlier when you made a distinction between your secondary art and the performance, I think that is partially what the question is trying to get at. And then behind that, now, you know, post-announcement that you're done with art, the question is a bit, she doesn't really believe that you're done with art. So is it a pose, a posture, or what story do you tell yourself about being done with art now in 2017?
If means try to say it means she don't believe me. I already done with art.
Yeah.
All right. But to me, you see, I'm a person very easy underground things to bring out, and so I don't need a responsibility. I'm more like just means I really know how, you know, doing something. But of course, to me, I feel, you know, I don't use art form doing life, right? Because if I say doing art must be have form, you know, to art frame, you know. So I don't do that, but I don't do like a to shampoo, you know, to like can, you know, underground. Because my can is like a probably question maybe is more like a maybe I don't need a form, you know, I'm just deep into and free thinking.
Yes.
It's good access. It's good. It's give me free because if art is give me. I know originally I come from life, and I believe in life if you are very difficult survival and people so poor. I told you, you don't need art. Many people, you know, don't need art. They can survive. They can live without art, you know, because art, if I say I'm homeless, I live the kind life is like homeless. But if I doing, and then I call art, oh, that's already so high level. I don't have to be done. I don't have to put out something. Just say I doing this piece art. You see, that's already so high. So if I don't use that, just free thinking. So homeless people free thinking, and intellectual people free thinking. So that passing time, you know. So to me, my create I already limited, right? And I don't have a, you know. So I feel I just go back, and I go back is only lose my reality, my career. You know, I'm no artist anymore, so I cannot produce something called art or you know, for different reason. But at least I feel this give me you know, go back to life. And I know art's origin from, you know, my art is not art to art. It's from life. So I stay quite long. I don't even have any idea I want to do form to make a piece art. If I have that, first I have to break the rule, right? And then the work is a value for me. Where I want to do break the rule and then do that. But I don't, you too long, I don't even have one idea. And, I'm more lazy or not good thinking. But it is, I'm thinking. Of course, I know if I survive, I must be hungry and go find food to eat, right? So to me, I feel, well, in this, I feel satisfied for what I pass in time, in this kind of way now. Yeah. So it's not about question, did I really do art or not? But it is, I believe you are so kind to say, probably this kind is like, kind of art. But I don't try to give. Somebody once said that they are, free to say that, So, did I say something makes sense?
Yes. Yeah. Another question just on the end there. Yes. Yeah. Takes a while to come on.
Sorry. This is actually a comment. And I also don't believe the Qing has exited from art. I think it's just the device to measure time passing changed. Because in each piece you have certain devices or set of rules to help mark the time passing. And it's just now it perhaps, from my point of view, changed to the natural, real time. So that's my comment.
May I say in a friendly way that the desire to insist that it's art against the statement of the artist is a bit like singing happy birthday when that person has to go. So, but I say it in a friendly way because I think it's very interesting that the category continues to be asserted when the artist, I think, is trying to get at something that we might call the fusion. I mean, if we think about duration in this sense, that it's like getting a PhD, it takes 16 years or whatever. A 13-year piece, 5 one-year pieces, it's a long concentration. It's a lot of energy, to use a Marina word, directed toward an object, and that object might be defined, might be. It's not the only way we could think about it, but one way to think about it is that it's trying to think about what is the distinction between art and life. And when you're in a realm of a 13-year-long piece, it's very difficult to maintain that distinction. So a word like fusion might be possible. So then you say it's the achievement of the fusion of art and life, and if that is the case, then the category of art is no longer necessary. It becomes redundant. And so the assertion, you must still be doing art, is misplaced in my view. That's one way of saying it, but I'm saying it or trying to say it in a friendly way, not in a critical way, just about the way in which our habits of mind, that this is part of the radicality of the work. It's very difficult to think this work. It's so hard because there's nobody else, I think, who does this kind of thing. And so our categories are
it's incredible for me, this moment right now, what we're talking about, because we have this unique example of an artist who doesn't need to do art.
Correct.
This is the most incredible, significant thing. I wish I'm there, but he is so much advanced, and it's so hard because it's a completely new category to think about. He doesn't need to do art because he's transcendent that wish, but actually art changed him, and that's the new thing.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I love you. I have to go to my own opening because they're going to kill me.
Thank you so kindly. But of course, I know this trip I come to Venice, and many people, it's not only here, or also maybe to see my show that, they give me a happy birthday more. That's kind of, I hear, even my English is not so good, but I can feel, it means many say happy birthday, and less to say about opposite way. Anyway, so thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for your contributions.